Hey everybody, what's going on? Welcome to this week's Lumix Live. Let me just make sure I've got my audio set up right. Yep, looks like everything's coming through clear. Cool. So, again, welcome to this week's Lumix Live. This particular stream, as a lot of you've probably seen, is going to be focusing very corely on the S series line of cameras. We've been going through a bit of a series this month with the point and shoots, the G series, and then now the S series. We talked about doing something with the camcorder line of cameras for those that want to do that, and we can certainly still do something like that. It just wouldn't necessarily be a full, hour-long stream. So we might do that, we might not. If that's something that y'all want to hear, let me know in the chat. We basically can figure out whenever we want to fit something like that in. But back to the point of today, we're going to be covering and answering basically all the questions that you guys have about the S-Series cameras. We're going to talk about some of the cool features that the cameras have. For some of this stuff, it may be a little redundant for some of you if you've already been using the cameras. And ultimately, kind of help provide some information for those of you that might be trying to understand what the differences are between each of them, since with firmware updates, they've gotten, in some cases, very close to each other. But I also want to talk about some of the cool things that we've seen over the last couple of months where S cameras are starting to be used in some other areas that maybe not all of us look into. But ultimately, some of the cool things that the cameras offer, I know a lot of people have questions about. So if you have a question, make sure to tag at Lumix Cameras in the chat, as you see a couple of people doing. So that I can see it pop up on my screen and we can actually address those questions. The other thing, like we've been doing for the last couple of streams, is I've dropped a poll in the chat here, just basically asking which of the S-Series cameras do you have or which are you most interested in? Unfortunately, I can only put up 4 answers, so the all option isn't there, as Albert had pointed out before. So if there's a camera in there, let me know which one you guys are really interested in or which ones you own. It's kind of cool to see currently the distribution. The S5 is definitely, at least in this group as of right now, definitely leading the pack. So we'll let that run for the next half hour, and then I'm going to throw up another poll maybe later on if I remember it while we're doing the broadcast. If you are new to these Lumix live streams, these are conversations that we have with you, the community, to basically either address whatever questions you have, troubleshoot things live on air. I have one of every camera here so that we can actually go through. I can plug them in and actually go through a menu option with you if that's things that you need troubleshooting with. And also just answering questions that you may have about what is in the cameras, as I said before. We also do a number of other kinds of streams where it'll either be having people come in from the photo and video side of the industry to actually just kind of share their experiences and hopefully provide some inspiration to people who may want to get some of that. And hopefully later next month, since we're going to be over at Cinegear at the trade show, hopefully we'll also be able to do some stuff with some industry people and talk about different components that are, paired up very nicely with the Lumix line of cameras. So we've got a whole bunch of really cool stuff that we do on Lumix Live here. So if any of that sounds like things that you're interested in, make sure to give us a subscribe, like the video, all that kind of stuff. Join in the conversation here in the chat. These are fully interactive streams, so as you ask questions, I'll be able to answer them here. And pretty much, I'm cool with answering pretty much anything that I can. There are certain topics that obviously I can't talk about, future products, things like that. Or unannounced things, or in one case I see someone asking about GH6. So like certain stuff like that, obviously I can't talk about because there is nothing to talk about. But we'll be covering pretty much all of this stuff. So before I go into the normal things that we do at the beginning of these streams, let's see what kind of questions we're seeing so far. So I am going to address, I am going to respond to this question, which was from Essex about S1R full sensor 5K ProRes 422 internal ProRes RAW via out HD or via Atomos. So one thing to remember about the S1R Essex is that that is a photography focused camera. Yes, it has a couple of cool video features. It's got 5K in a 3:2 aspect ratio, and it's got some now can do 4K 60p out over HDMI, and it does have less of a crop in 4K 60p because of the higher resolution sensor and the faster readout that that sensor has. So it is a very different tool, but it is not in any way focused as a video tool. It's designed differently, its targets, its goals, its internal design is very different. So in that case, it's not going to be a video powerhouse in the ways that you're asking about here. So, unfortunately, it's just not there. For video-specific cameras, that's where you're going to look at an S1, S5, or an S1H. Let's see here. A couple questions about Sigma lens support, so we will definitely get to those too. Some CF Express questions. Some others asking about the S1R, wanting it designed for video. Yeah. Cool. All right. So before I continue any further, I want to remind everybody about the Lumix Pro services. We've been running this program for a while now, and knowing that a lot of people in this particular chat, since a lot of you have S-Series cameras or are looking at S-Series cameras, having a support system about your product is kind of a big deal, especially as we start to get back into more and more paid professional work or travel, things like that, where things could potentially go wrong down the line while you're working with a camera. So we have two options. We have the Lumix Pro Services Red tier, which is a free membership, and then we have the Lumix Pro Services Platinum tier, which is a paid service. Both of these tier services have some different requirements as far as cameras go and equipment to get into these programs, but they're a great way to have some good peace of mind for your equipment. And if you have anything in the Lumix lineup, it's worth at least getting into the Red program, since that is free. It gets you a membership ID. You get a direct access into any kind of service and repairs. So if for some reason you have an issue with your camera and you need to send it into repair, you get to go through the Lumix Pro Services program instead of the general Panasonic service program. And you also get yourself registered in with that 3-year extended warranty, which is in both of these packages. So that covers any kind of manufacturer warranty kind of things. So not drops, not breaks, not that kind of stuff. It's if for some reason the camera just stops working on you for absolutely no reason, you'd have a warranty repair. But then we have the Platinum Series. The Platinum Series is the step up. It's a fee program here in the United States, so you do have to pay to get into it. But you get some fairly nice added benefits to it. So you get 2-day repair turnaround, 2-day repairs with the next day shipping free for those repairs. So your time out without the camera is minimized. You get a free membership hotline access. So if you need to call in and actually speak to somebody, you get a direct line into our team. You get annual sensor cleanings and EVF cleanings, lens calibrations and firmware updates, all that fun stuff. As well as you get a welcome kit that's got a Peak Design strap with it. So it's a really cool, nice added strap, since I can't remember the last time any of us have actually really used the original strap that comes with Panasonic cameras, or actually any camera for that matter. They're good straps, but this one's a little bit nicer. You also get that 3-year warranty, the metal membership card, and more importantly, for those situations where you need to use warranty or out of warranty repair, which would be something like a drop or a damage, you get 20% off out of warranty repairs. So if you're someone who uses your cameras professionally, or you are someone who might be a little bit harder on your equipment, like I am, it can be a nice added benefit to make sure you've got that peace of mind while you're out shooting. So with that, Oh, and the one thing that I do constantly keep forgetting to mention is that the Lumix Pro Services is both in the United States and it is in many other countries as well. So if you're in the United States, you're able to take a look at the link that I just dropped in the chat there, or you can use the QR code that was on the screen before. If you are not in the United States, we have Lumix Pro Services in a number of other regions as well. So if you take a look at the second link there, that will show you which countries have Lumix Pro Services ready to go, that you can take a look at their equipment requirements and what their different levels are and their different tiers. There are different tiers in different countries, depending on what equipment you have and what the requirements are to get into it and different pricing. So feel free to take a look at those. And yeah, let's kind of get into some more of the questions here. You go back up to the first of the other questions here. So from Benjamin, I think it's Benjamin. The AF and the Sigma lens is terrible. I own a 24-70 and it's very slow. Is there any firmware update on Sigma coming soon for L mount or any other solution for this? So, for something like that, you would have to directly be asking Sigma. It is their lens, their product. We don't have anything to do with other manufacturers outside of Panasonic. Yes, we're in an alliance. All of the specifications for how things work are a set standard for all of the different cameras that are part of the L mount alliance to what they should be working to. But any question like that would need to go over to, or be addressed over to Sigma as far as firmware updates go. Let's see here. The other one here, Brian says, how can I tell if a Sigma lens supports linear focus? So the linear focus thing is going to be, it's a little different between the way each of the L mount alliance manufacturers are working with it. A lot of it comes down to what motors are being used in the different lenses. All of our S-series lenses have the ability to toggle between variable focus throw and linear focus throw, as well as programming the degree that you actually make that manual focus throw. From what I understand, I have not been able to test this myself because I don't have the money to go out and get Leica L lenses. Some of those lenses, from what I understand, do support this. And a lot of it, from my understanding, comes down to which motors are being used, whether they're linear, stepper, that kind of setup. So basically right now, all of our lenses use at least some sort of combination of linear and stepper motors. The 50mm and the 70-200 2.8 use both styles. A lot of the others use the linear motors, which mean that they're faster, a lot more tuned for that kind of control. The other thing is our manual focus rings. A lot of it from, again, what I understand of how that system works is that information, the positioning information, has to be transferred as well. So if it's not designed into the lens, it may not have it. However, with certain things like like I have the Sigma 45 2.8, which was the lens that was part of the, I think it was the pre-order promotion with the S5 when that came out. Sigma makes the dock for this lens, which gives you, lets you control what their speed is for manual focusing. So you can change it from like a long throw to a short throw. Not necessarily linear, but it does give you some more control over it. So you can take a look and see if you've got Sigma lenses, look on their website, see if the dock is compatible with your L mount lens, and it'll help you kind of get some different control on how their manual focusing works. So hopefully that answers that, or at least helps direct where that would be. Let's see here. Lux is asking, when in face detect autofocus, what does the area feature actually do? Face detect autofocus, what does the area feature do? Not 100% sure I'm following the question, Lux. If you can expand which area you're referencing, I might be able to go into more detail, but I know face detect has the ability to actually select an area if you're just tapping on the screen, and that's basically an override from the face detect mode. So if you're in face detect and then you decide, hey, I want to focus on this point, you can tap on the screen and override it without having to go in and change the focus modes. Similar to how if you're using in the newest firmware updates for all the cameras, if you're using one area or one area plus, you can now enable face and animal tracking, or human and animal tracking independently of each other, so that basically wherever that center point is, when a face is detected on that center point or a subject on that center point, it will switch over to face detection for that. And then if you move out of frame, then it reverts back to that single point. So similar concept, just which is being activated after you've started. So a couple different options there. Let's see here. Keith says, who can I lobby to persuade that even the S1R is not designed for video? Some owners of the S cameras and make great B cam. I'd pay for an SFU2 worth market survey. Truth is, I just don't, I truthfully don't think, and I don't want to be someone who's going to, get hopes up of anybody, but the S1R is just not designed for video. There's a lot of differences that go in there. It's one of the reasons why a lot of people ask us, why does the S1R not have vlog, or a log profile? Log profiles have to be designed for the sensor that you're using. It's not a one-size-fits-all. It's the same reason why, over and over again, I have to constantly remind people, you can't just take a Micro Four Thirds camera that's running Vlog L and throw the Vlog tone curve or the Vlog curve on it. It doesn't work like that. It's not magic. They have to be designed for what the sensor's capable of. And again, the S1R, it's designed as a stills camera. I would love to see more video features. I think it's cool that it got 5K, which is it's a different aspect ratio. It's a 3:2 aspect ratio, but or actually I think it's a 5:4 aspect ratio. But yeah, it's just not. It's just primarily the stills camera. One of the things I know we get a lot of questions at is, why is it that we focus so heavily on videography and video shooters and not really that much on photographers? Well, we do. We have the S1R, which gets you a solid photography camera, and then you just get a lot of questions about, hey, I want more video features, or I want more of this. It's just kind of where it's at. Aside from that, one of the things to remember too is that if you're looking at an S1R and you want to shoot 4K 60p with the 1.1 crop, which is much wider, closer to full frame or full sensor width, that does, it's not doing oversampling. That is I believe that's a binned image. Yeah, binned. So yes, you get a wider field of view, but it's not necessarily going to be as crisp and sharp as something that's coming from an S1, S5, or an S1H. So different trade-offs because of sensor resolutions, things like that. Let's see here. What are the other questions? Yes, of course. I have the S1H2, but given that the R would be giving that to the R would be insane. Yeah, I hear, and I know a lot of people hear, that the R would be cool to have more video features, but yeah, it's kind of just, you look at what it's designed to do and what it's really gonna excel at, and photography, landscape shooters, depending on what your feeling is about using cameras in alternative methods. So like, I have my S1R that I've actually had converted to a full spectrum camera. Makes it a great astro camera and night shooting, like that kind of thing. The photography cameras just let you get some different aspects of it. So little bit of a different area there. Let's see here. Please enable longer than 1 second shutter speed in high-res mode on the S1. That has been something I know that I've requested Redbit. I would love to be able to do longer than 1 second on the S1, even the S1R for high-res mode and stuff like that. I know that the S5 has it, but I'm not sure. I can check and see if it's something to do with just the processor generations that are between the cameras. Let's see, what else? Just a reminder, if you guys have questions, make sure to tag at Lumix Cameras, as you see a bunch of people doing. This way I see them, and we can actually be addressing them. Let's see here. Sacred, hi. I noticed the S1H firmware 1, if I frame someone like a portrait and then I was recording them in 5.9K, their hair would move or seem to float by itself. Seems gone. Why did that happen? Not 100% sure if I'm following. That their hair would move or seem to float by itself. Um, it's possible that as from the original firmware with the S1, S1H, and S1R, the stabilization algorithm was revised as we updated firmware. So when I think it was the first firmware update or the second firmware update, the camera went from 6.5 stops of stabilization to 7. So it's possible that in that firmware update, there were just some minor tweaks that just, kind of reworked how the Dual IS2 system worked, which could have been what you were seeing in the original firmware compared to now. So outside of that, don't really have too much of a clear answers to what exactly could be there. Let's hear. Keith says... Oh, yeah, just reminding about the tagging at Lumix cameras. Where's Dan's question? What is the best method of setting your exposure in the Lumix S5? Vlog, natural, etc. I know that this camera is capable of getting great video images. I have difficulty getting a good image in video. So, for Dan, there's a couple different things that you can take a look at. One thing is, if you've never shot with a log profile before, it's going to take a lot more work in post to get an image that looks the way you probably want it to look. Basically, it's a profile meant for editing. And anyone that's in the chat that shoots in log for video, y'all know what I'm talking about. It's not necessarily the easiest. It's not that forgiving when it comes to, it's very forgiving in very different ways if you know what you're doing with it. If you've never shot with it before, it's going to be hard to get yourself into actually working with it to where you're going to get to the endpoint that you want to go to. I highly suggest for someone that's just getting into shooting with it and wanting to get, kind of the best results out of it and then slowly building yourself into a log profile and then maybe even a raw profile, start with something like natural, or one of the Cine profiles, so Cine like D or V, and then get a look going that you like. So start with the look that you really want to go with. If you can get it in camera, that's great. It saves you the time to not necessarily have to use a log profile. And a log profile is not going to be what I recommend for every single thing that you want to shoot. It's not always a good idea or even something that's needed to shoot it. As an example for stuff like this, these live streams, or if I'm ever, or when I do record training videos, since I do all of our training videos for sales staff and things like that at all the photo retailers here in the US, I would never shoot those things in log because it's adding an extra layer of processing and editing that I have to do when ultimately I don't need the video to look, pull out the highest dynamic range. Not to mention this set isn't necessarily really in need of shooting in a log profile. So for something like that, you shoot yourself in like 709 in this case because we're broadcasting to YouTube, or if I know that I'm going to be sending it up on YouTube and it's going to be viewed by people for training, I'm usually just shooting in 709 and then setting the exposure and everything the way I want it. What you can do once you know what the look is that you're trying to go for or trying to emulate is then you can start looking at the tools that the cameras offer. The S5 has actually a lot of really good tools to help you, judge exposure and make sure that the image is giving you enough latitude to work with. When you shoot in something like the Cine D profile or the Like 709 or natural or anything outside of Vlog, you can use what's called the luminance spot meter in the camera. What that'll do is it gives you an extra box on the screen that you can move up to your highlight, move into your shadow, and see on a percentage scale where that particular spot is falling on the IRE scale. So you know that you can take that number, put it up into the sky, if you're shooting in like outdoors, if you're shooting like a landscape or you're filming someone and you've got a great big sky behind them, You can take that box, put it up in the sky, make sure that it reads somewhere around, say, like 80 or 90% on there, and you know that you're safe for your highlights. You know that you're not going to be blowing them out in the 709 color space. You can go into your shadows and make sure that they're usually around something like 7 to 10%. You don't really want to have them down at 0 because that means there's no information there. So the luminance spot meter can really help you pick different areas in your frame if you're trying to maximize dynamic range. Or if you're really only worried about the subject, so skin tones, things like that, you can put that box right on the skin tone, make sure that it's somewhere around like 42%, which equates to about 42 IRE. Or if you're using something like a color checker, you can have this in the frame, bring up your white balance card, and make sure that that box, when it's put on this part right here, is reading at 42%, which would be 42 IRE. That same technique carries over to when you start using vlog. The difference being, that vlog is going to represent in stops instead of percentage. So you'll be able to do the exact same thing, make sure that a gray card is coming up at 0, move that box up into the highlight, the brightest point in your frame, and as long as it's under 6 stops, you know that you're going to be good on highlights. And if you go into your shadow regions, you can do 8 stops under, but you really kind of want to try to keep yourself around like 5 stops under. This way you know that you're not adding noise in a log profile by having to bring your shadows up. It's the concept of exposing to the right, where you push as much of the information into your highlight region in your midtones so that you don't have to dig into the shadows too much on a digital image to bring detail back. You'll end up with an overall cleaner image, and you have more highlight room with the log profile, especially in a camera like the S1H, things like that, to be able to bring those back in post and work that way. So there's a lot that you can play around with. And definitely check with a lot of the other people in the chat, because some others may have very different ways that they like to work with the color profiles to get yourself a really good image. Let's see here. Might be a bit off topic question, but how come the new 51.8 is so much more compact than the LUMIX 51.8? That is a good question. Ours is better. The reality is, so with a 50mm lens, which I don't have my 50mm here, but I have my 85, so it's the same external housing. It's kind of the goal of the 1.8 series lenses. So with our 50mm, there's a common feeling or opinion about the quote-unquote nifty 50. So the affordable 50mm lens. And that's that they're inexpensive to make and they're simple optical designs, which for the most case is relatively true. A 50mm lens, if you've studied or looked at any kind of optic designs, things like that, a 50mm lens is relatively easy to make. And I know if you're an optics engineer that's watching this, I know that I probably just really annoyed you by making it sound like it's easy. But what you see with a lot of those lenses that are trying to become super, super compact and tiny, they have to give up quality in different areas. So some of those areas would be chromatic aberration, sharpness to a point. That's where you start to see, edge-to-edge sharpness differences, the amount of vignetting that the lens is going to have versus others. But more importantly, what you really start to see is in how older optic designs, like what's currently being used in a lot of the 50mm, like the nifty 50s, they're old optic designs. They were designed back in the film era, so they were designed to reproduce an image on a film, on an actual film. So you start to look at that and say, all right, well, now you're starting to get cameras that that have much higher resolution. So you need lenses that resolve much higher than what those film lenses were designed to. That technology starts to really kind of change how optics are designed. Our 50mm has a little bit of a different spin on it. So its goal is to not be the smallest, most compact 50 millimeter for the system out there. I mean, as it is, you can see, even the Sigma 45 2.8, which is their contemporary series, it's close to a 50. It's a lot smaller, and it's a good lens, but it's not as sharp as the 51.8. It doesn't have the fast aperture. It's a 2.8 versus a 1.8. So you start looking at, well, all right, how should a lens be designed? The 1.8 series that we have, there is a very specific goal in mind about designing the 1.8 series. The 50, the 85, the 35 when it comes out, and the 24 when it comes out are designed around the same chassis. That means that, one, you get a little bit more room to work with on some of the lenses that theoretically could be smaller to make them better. It also means that if you're someone in the video side of the industry that's using things like the gimbal that I have up here, so it's an RSC2, that means that you can be changing these prime lenses out and not have to rebalance your kit because your 50 millimeter is much smaller than your 85, or it's smaller than your 35 or 24. So you start to look at the overall design and the purpose of a lens. You get different benefits for doing each. The other thing is our lenses are designed from the ground up for digital sensors, which means we get to do things like including linear focus motors, which makes them a lot faster. We get to also make sure that we're designing to minimize things like focus breathing and vignetting. We get to also design them, again, so that they're physically about the same size. Actually, they are physically the same size as the 85 in this case now. That's why you start to see some of the differences there. That's also typically why you see that there's some price differences between the ultra cheap lenses, because they're relatively inexpensive to manufacture because it's been an optic design that's been made for years. It's just rehoused in a more modern casing. So that's where you get some of those differences around there. But ultimately, that very long-winded response is to say, ours is better, go with ours. Keith says, speaking of market surveys, could Lumix do one to gauge willingness to pay for firmware updates so we can get more features sooner and help the company stay afloat? We are always doing market surveys. The question is just whether or not you fall in the category of who's being surveyed. A lot of that stuff can kind of just depend. But yeah, we do market surveys. We do reach out and gather tons of information about what features are most important to people. The LUMIX live streams here is definitely one of those areas where as you start to make these comments and requests, our team in Japan, I put reports out to our team about this all the time, about what I'm hearing, what y'all are saying to us about features and things that you want to see. So that's one way of doing the survey. It's not really a formalized version, but anything that you guys say here, we do promote back up. Yeah. So let's see here. The other question about RAW files in the S1. RAW file is 6072 by 4016. When I convert them to JPEG and Silky Pics using the same size, I get a crop of 6000 by 3368. Yes. Certain programs, when you are looking at the RAW file, the actual RAW file, so you're looking at the difference between the total pixels and the actual pixels, or actual pixels and the image pixels. In any digital sensor, any camera that's out there, the sensor may record more than what is actually being output, and a lot of that comes down to the fact that pretty much every single digital camera these days, the RAW files include some lens correction data. So that would be some things to correct for some slight distortion, things like that. That's where your size differences are typically coming from, is that the full file is 6072 by 4160 in programs that are looking for that. And then the output, same size, is 6000 by 3368 because it's the 6000 width is the 24 megapixel in that case. So that's why you're seeing a little bit of that difference there. Let's see here. Nelson says 5K is 4x3. Yeah. Thanks for going all the way back to that point on the S1R. Yes, it's 4x3. I did check it on my camera and realized after that. Let's hear. Keith says, I've used the S1R's B cam with great results, and if it can do hybrid log gamma, why can't it do vlog? Vlog is a different profile than hybrid log gamma. Vlog is something that has to be designed for a sensor. It's not something you can just slap on, like we mentioned before. So hybrid log gamma is very different. Hybrid log gamma is a tone curve to balance out and set up it's closer to a deliverable color space. It was originally designed so that you could take HDR content and display it on an SDR display and have it map properly. People have shifted to actually editing that color profile, so that's why you see hybrid log gamma is a little bit more used these days. It's also a 420 10-bit standard versus vlog, which really doesn't matter what you're using. I mean, it matters in the editing side. Higher bit rate or higher bit depth is better. Higher chroma subsampling is better. But yeah, just because a camera can do HLG doesn't necessarily mean that it's designed or can do vlog. So it's kind of where the difference is there. Let's see here. Riederman says, did you try your modded S1R not for IR but for UV photography? I have not. Since this is a full spectrum converted S1R, that means that I can, just with a filter on the front, either shoot infrared, full spectrum. You can do ultraviolet if you put an ultraviolet filter on the front. Basically blocks out all those different things, but it's a very specific use of this camera. Astrophotography and full spectrum conversion. This camera is rated one of the best, if not the best, in the industry to do those things too. So if you're someone who's into very specialized types of photography, not that it's something we manufacture and you're totally on your own if you convert your camera and have someone go in there and change it, but I did have my camera converted by Kalari Vision in New Jersey in the US. To full spectrum, and I just have a couple of different filters. Like this is they make a hot filter, so I can put this on there and shoot it like a regular camera. Or I have their IR chrome filter, which lets me mimic the old aerochrome style. And then I just bought an 850 nanometer infrared filter that I've got coming to throw on this as well. So cool uses for cameras if you're in a very specialized segment of the market. Not everyone's going to want a camera like this, but if you are looking at doing something like that, the S1R has been, if you read out some of the different articles on there, it is a pretty solid option, if not the solid option to do these things with. So let's see here. Benjamin, is there going to be any Lumix super telephoto lens for L mount? The only options right now are the Sigma 150 to 600, just came out. Unfortunately, I don't have any information on future lenses other than what we've announced and kind of shown in roadmaps. So we know that the 24 and the 35 millimeter f1.8 are coming. Outside of that, I don't have any information that I can tell you. The longest one that we make from Lumix is the 70 to 300, which I've got right here. So you've got a long-ish lens. Obviously, it's not 600 millimeter, but from what I've heard, the Sigma 150 to 600 in L mount is actually a pretty solid lens for long telephoto shooters. Let's see here. Andrew says, could the S1R have strobe burst? It doesn't currently. So that's a bit of a tricky thing. So the Lumix cameras, the S-series cameras, and some of the G-series cameras do support burst shooting with strobes. However, you do need to use the 580L, I believe it's the 580L and the 360L, the Lumix flashes. So those are our flashes. My understanding, it has something to do with the timing for the actual flash durations. But it is something I know that we have had a number of questions about for burst shooting, and it is something that we do bring up with the engineers to see, is it something that can be addressed with future cameras, with other, not necessarily future cameras, but compatibility for other flash systems. Knowing that in the L Alliance, so as far as the accessories go, Broncolor and I believe Pro Photo are part of the L Alliance for accessories. So yeah, we just have to take a look at that. It's similar to the 360th of a second flash sync speed. You can use it on ours, and I believe that there is a Pro Photo Flash that does it as well. Yeah, but I can we can check in for some stuff like that. Let's see here. Combat says, is the S1 capable of 48 hertz frequency like the S1H, or does it more closely resemble the S5? Trying to figure out if the S1 is capable of true 24. So, the only S series camera that has the actual 24 hertz mode, so the cinema mode, is the S1H. The S1, the S5, and the S1R are only going to be able to shoot in NTSC or PAL, which can be switched in the menu. So yeah, if you need a true 24p, so 24.00 frames per second, that is the S1H option there. Let's see here. Dennis says, really hope to see a 48p in external RAW as well. I would love to see 48p in external RAW. However, 48 frame, from my understanding, is not necessarily a normalized frame rate. But it is something that we ask about as far as the standards go over HDMI. But yeah, we always ask about those things. We always pass them on to our team. Let's see here. What are the questions we got? Cliff is asking, hey Cliff, how are you? Can Panasonic Service remove the optical low pass filter to make it similar to an S1? No. We don't do those services. There are companies out there that you can send your camera into and have things like that removed. I believe Kalari Vision does have different conversion kits that you can do. It's not something you would do on your own, but know that anytime you do stuff like that, you're totally voiding the warranty that Panasonic would carry with the product. So yeah, do stuff like that at your own risk. Sacred says, on the S1R, is -5 noise reduction the same as turning noise reduction off, or is 0 noise reduction off and -5 is some kind of artificial noise? Same with sharpness. So -5 noise reduction, it's not off. There still would be noise reduction being used in it. 0 is going to be what the camera is designed and spec'd to do. -5 would be just lessening the noise reduction algorithms that are being used. And that will always go for sharpness. The way cameras are designed, and that goes for sharpness. The way cameras are designed, whatever is 0 out of the box is typically what the design spec was for, based on our image quality targets. The S1H is the one kind of, I'd say, outlier in this case, because we did push a firmware update that allowed a -1 in Vlog with the noise reduction, since normally you couldn't do that in a log profile, which basically removed some of the algorithm that was being done, because for certain styles of shooting, it actually provided a more favorable look. But that's why it was never changed that -1 became 0. It gets confusing at that point. Ultimately, when it comes to noise reduction, especially if you're looking at, say, like the photo side, I usually just leave mine always at 0. I really don't ever see much of an issue one way or another. And I usually don't do any kind of those adjustments in camera, because most of the time noise reduction and stuff like that's going to affect your JPEG images, not your still RAW images. But if you're shooting RAW, or if you're shooting video, then yeah, it has some effect on there. Let's see here. Some of the questions. Redbit, S124 is 2398. Yeah. So it's kind of just there. Combat says, can the S5 send a true 24p signal to an external recorder, or does it send 2398? It's going to be 2398 because it's the NTSC standard. Or you'll do the 25 frame if you set the camera to PAL. Essex, curious if the S1R can use 5K with full sensor and not pixel, or 4K 10-bit internal. HLG is cool, but you have to crop in so heavy. So the full sensor width difference between 5K and the full resolution of the 47 megapixel sensor, it's not that big of a difference. So I think you run into sampling issues. You wouldn't actually be able to oversample the image down. You'd run into some odd, weird setups. So the 5K, from my understanding, is the highest that current camera can do. As far as 4K 10-bit internal, again, we've talked about this before. The S1R, it's designed as a stills camera. That's really where it's going to sit. So if you need things like 4K 10-bit internal, you got to look at an S1, S5, or an S1H. Yeah. What's the latest news on the 24 and 35mm primes? I'm dying to get my hands on a 35. Not sure how much longer I can wait. I might have to invest in the Sigma options. I wish I had more information for you guys. But yeah, about the best I can tell you is the rest of the 1.8 series, I mean, even as it is, the 50 and the 85, they're going to be worth the wait because of some of the things we talked about before. Linear focus, you have the focus angle control, the degrees, minimize focus breathing, all that kind of stuff. There's a very, very solid path for these lenses, and quality takes time, especially in this current world climate of what we're all dealing with in cameras. Yeah. Trinity Media, is the S1H considered by Lumix as a cinema camera since it was Netflix approved? So it's a Lumix camera. For those that don't necessarily follow all of the Lumix series, we do have, or the Panasonic cameras, we do have cinema series cameras, which would be the Vericam and the Eva. They are a different group than the Lumix products. So Lumix is our consumer imaging brand. And the S1H is... it's basically a cinema camera without the cinema camera official classification, if you want to put it that way, which actually brings up kind of a good point. When you talk about that Netflix certification, or the Netflix Post-Technology Alliance certification, if to be official about it, that certification is one of the reasons why you'll see certain studios add these cameras into their productions. We've talked to a number of filmmakers before on the stream about what the importance of that was, and to a lot of people, I've seen some comments on the Facebook groups actually asking about this, in particular about this particular piece, the short that was done by Bo Burnham. That was shot on an S1H, and that was distributed by Netflix. It was a Netflix product. Having that camera as a certified camera, which means that it meets their standards, allows filmmakers much more flexibility in what they want to do with a project. Yes, other cameras can be used, but it really comes into how much of the end result can have that other camera footage in it. By having the S1H as a certified camera as on an A-list, and same with the BGH1, it means that the filmmakers don't have to pick and choose what angles can be used on those other cameras outside of their main cinema cameras. So if you've got someone shooting, a project on a Red or a Vericam, they don't have to be very careful with their secondary shots or their B-roll shots because the camera is not on the approved list. There's a percentage of the final result that can be on non-approved cameras. By having the S1H in the kit, they don't have to worry about that. You could shoot as much of that final product with that camera and have it mixed in, and you don't worry about the end result for it. So, in a way, yes, it's a cinema camera, but it's under the Lumix badging. And yeah, it just makes it a much more flexible tool there. Let's see here. Ryan says, is there an updated LUT for taking S5 Vlog to 709 color space? Currently using the Vericam LUT, and I feel like the results are not great. There are tons of LUTs out there. The ones that we provide are designed very, very much if you're someone working with the Vericam, with EVA 1, with a GH5, with a GH5 Mark II, or even a GH5S, and the rest of the S-series cameras. You can use our LUTs and get the same response across all the cameras, the difference being that you just look at the different dynamic ranges that are capable from each of those different sensors. Again, that goes to the log profiles and how they're deployed on each of those sensors. I see some others have mentioned in here that there are tons of really good options out there in the market. I don't want to call out anyone in particular or show favoritism in any case like that, but if you go into any of the Facebook groups, there are tons of them out there. I think I saw Dennis was in here, who I think is the same Dennis that's over on the Facebook groups. You could probably attest to it. There are so many conversations in the different groups about different LUTs that are available. I would definitely turn that question over to people who are shooting more commonly with the different LUTs that are available to get you different styles and things like that. Let's see here. Trini Media says, I'd like to suggest that LUMIX engineers make a 20mm 1.8. Sometimes 24 isn't wide enough, and 20mm is a sweet spot, especially for vlogging. Well, lucky you could just go pick up the 20 to 60mm. If you're doing vlogging, you don't necessarily need ultra fast aperture at 20mm. It's not really going to be a huge depth of field difference for vlogging, and the 20 to 60mm is a solid option for that. But we will pass that particular focal length and aperture request on to our team as usual. Let's see here. Thanks for the answer, but I'm still confused. I understand cropping by 2% to 6,000 in width. I'm confused by cropping almost 18% to 33R. Are you sure I'm not doing anything wrong? Without seeing, like, the one thing I'd say is, what aspect ratio are you shooting in? Because let me double check here, because I assume that you were talking on an S1R, right? Wherever that question was. So it's tomorrow 97. There it is. So question mark raw S1 file 6072 by 4116. You're getting 6000 by 3368. So that would be, well, I'll use my S5. It's the same resolution here. So your raw file size on this camera for still is going to be in a 3:2 aspect ratio. You're going to be shooting 6000 by 4000 is your 3:2 aspect ratio. So if you're shooting 6000 by 3368, are you shooting in a different aspect ratio? I would take a look and see if you've got the camera set 33. Okay, 6000 by 3368 is a 16:9 aspect ratio. So most likely, if you've got the camera set up to shoot in a 16:9 aspect ratio, that's why you're seeing that crop down. The S series cameras, if you shoot in RAW, will always shoot the full resolution of the sensor, and then it tags that RAW image whatever aspect ratio you had the camera set to shoot in. So in your particular case, the initial resolution is showing you the full aspect ratio, the full resolution. When you go and you say same as for exporting, it's then saying, hey, you told me that you wanted this in a 16:9 aspect ratio, so now I'm going to crop out the top and bottom, shift the sides back to the right kind of setup, and then there you go. So that's actually where I think that difference is coming up for you. So just double check what your aspect ratio is set at. I think it's Morrow 1977, I think, if I'm pronouncing that right. If I'm not pronouncing that right, I apologize. Cliff says, S1H, can Panasonic service remove the optic low-pass filter to make it similar to S1? I answered that before, Cliff. We don't do that. That's not a service that Panasonic would offer. Let's see here. Sacred says, thanks. I did notice the JPEGs were sharper, but not the RAWs. Yeah, none of the in-camera editing that you do to any of those tools, sharpness, noise reduction, stuff like that, none of that's going to affect a RAW file, especially if you're looking at stills. RAW files don't carry that stuff over. It's the same thing why if like you shoot still images in, say, standard on the camera and then throw it into Lightroom, you'll see a very different looking image when it populates into Lightroom. That's where you have to go in and say, hey, I want you to be using the camera standard profile or camera landscape profile, excuse me, so that you're getting closer to the start point that you were using before. Let's see here. Keith says, is there a way to do manual focus in real time? I've had problems focusing with astrophotography or at night events with low light. When I start rotating the focus ring, it keeps focusing. So for that, most likely what you might be running into is two things. If you're using constant preview, that's the name of it. If you're using constant preview, it's going to try to mimic your shutter speed, or it's going to mimic your shutter speed. So if you're doing astrophotography and you've got, say, a 13-second exposure, it's going to update that image every 13 seconds. So when you make a shift or focus, you got to wait that time for it to change over. With astro shooting, you don't want to use constant preview. You want to use the night mode and what's called live view boost. There are 2 levels for live view boost, mode 1 and mode 2. One of them lets the display refresh at a slower rate versus the other to get a brighter looking image. Because all that's doing is that's just pushing the gain up on the display, not on the image. So you play around with both of those different modes, see which one works best for you. I typically find that, let me make sure, because I have my S1R set up like that. My S1R I have set up to do, let's see here. No, I want to do live view boost. I have my live view boost set up to do mode 1, which is it will slightly drop the frame rate on the rear display. And then in the S cameras, you have the option to run it in program, aperture, shutter, and manual, or just in manual. So take a look at those, see if that probably will help a bit with the issue. But ultimately, if you go too dark in a scenario, you're going to have to drop frame rate anyway in the refresh rate for the display. So you will have a little bit of a trail when you're manual focusing, where it seems like it's continuing to focus after you stop. But yeah, that would be the closest thing. The other thing is throwing night mode on there too, just because it's a lot easier to actually focus. At least I find that it is. Let's see here. What other questions we got? Thor says, what is the best lens for S5 for vlogging and time-lapse? Personally, I love the 20 to 60 millimeter, the kit lens that comes with the S5. I think it's a solid option to use for general shooting. It's a solid sharp lens. It's great for photo. It's great for video. If you're vlogging with it, you have that 20 millimeter wide angle, so you can do 1080 60p or 4K 30p and use the full sensor width. Or you can do something, if you have to do 60p, the Super 35 crop isn't as bad with a 20 millimeter lens because you're only 1.5 times. You could always go wider than something like that, but I still typically go with the 20 to 60. I also think the 20 to 60 is just a solid general purpose lens for any of the cameras that we have in the S series. It just matches up really well with the S5 though. And if you're someone that's doing time lapse, you get a nice mix of, not ultra wide, but you get nice wide angle shot for, kind of more dramatic time lapse shooting. And then you also have some decent telephoto-ish at the 60 millimeter range if you want to do some zoom ins there. So that's probably the big one that I would say. Let's see here. Dennis says, Vlog L in the G series is also used a completely different color space, which uses closer to 709 primaries. Why you, yeah, so to Dennis's point, when you look at also what color primaries are being used, that's when you start looking at, is the S series, you can't use a Vlog L LUT for a Vlog LUT in a lot of the ones that are being designed outside of the Panasonic ones. Ours are designed to kind of get them close. But yeah, definitely for anyone that wants to know about, color LUTs and things like that, definitely take a look at some of the Facebook groups. There's tons of people there, Dennis being one of them, I believe. Again, as long as it's the same Dennis that I know over on the Facebook groups or have interacted with. There's tons of people that can help you get good information on different LUTs out there to get yourself a little bit easier. Let's see. Combat says, when shooting 48 frames per second on the S1H, is there a crop? Yeah, the 48 frame per second is shooting from the Super 35 region. So it's about a 1.5 crop into the center of the frame. So it's a Super 35 region in the middle. Let's see here. Brandon's asking, can you discuss the 5.9K Blackmagic RAW recording capabilities to the S5? Yeah. So with the firmware update that we provided a couple of months ago, which I've got the page up here. So if we go to, which update was it? I think it was this one. Yeah. So with the update that we published a little while back, we added the Blackmagic RAW recording over HDMI to a number of the cameras. This lets you do 5.9K, so that's 5888 by 3112 at 30p, 25 and 24 frames, so 2997, 25 and 2398. So you get your 16 by 9 aspect ratio, and they're a 12-bit RAW file out into the Video Assist 12G. You do also have the APS-C 4K 60p version, which is going to be a DCI 4K, so that's 17 by 9, and you also have the anamorphic 3.5K. All of these modes you record right into the Blackmagic Video Assist 12G, and that lets you bring it into Resolve and work with it for your in your Resolve workflow. There are some differences, as I'm sure some in the chat have worked with and can attest to. If you're used to working with native Blackmagic RAW from Blackmagic cameras, you will see a little bit of a difference in what controls you have and what they're called. Things like the ISO changing in post in Resolve, where on some of the Blackmagic cameras, you can actually say, like, I want to set the camera to 600 ISO or 640 or 4000. With our cameras in the Blackmagic workflow, it's a slider. Ultimately, if you take a look at Sharif Mokbel's video about Blackmagic RAW, it's basically the same thing. It's just being displayed to you in a different manner. So you're still getting benefits to do your exposure shifting in post with Blackmagic RAW. It's just the information is being presented to you differently between the two cameras. It's still Blackmagic RAW. I think the other difference there is that the highlight recovery selector isn't available. But questions about, if that can be added or stuff like that, you would need to present those over to Blackmagic, since it's their file format and it's their setup. So ultimately, though, whether you're a Resolve shooter or you are a Resolve editor, or you work in Premiere or you work in Final Cut, the raw outputs are solid. It just really depends on what your workflow is. DaVinci Resolve definitely seems to be one of the more in the forefront for what a lot of people are using. But if you're someone who works with Apple and you work in Final Cut, then you've got the ProRes functionality as well, or ProRes RAW functionality in the S cameras as well, or the S1, S1R, and S1, S5, and S1H. So you've got a RAW workflow that works in Final Cut. Both of them can work in Premiere. You just need plugins from either the ProRes or the Blackmagic. So it really, the whole point of those updates is that you've basically got the option to work in almost any of the different platforms that you edit in for any of these cameras. It makes it a real solid option for people to work with. Let's see here. What other questions we got, or what other comments we got here? Ryan says, any chance we can get color bars and focus transition added to a future S5 update? Would be awesome. I don't know how likely stuff like that would be to get added to an S5. Certain things are gonna just stick to an S1H, just because of what the camera's designed to do. So I can't make any promises, but yeah. Let's see here. Some of the other, Bob says, are there any new lenses in the pipeline? Even if I did know, I wouldn't be able to tell you. Dennis says it's absolutely worth it. Any signs of temporal noise reduction are gone. Way better motion and 12-bit color is a dream to work with. Yeah, so that's depending on what project you're working in. That's where you start to look at RAW can give you a ton of benefits, but it does require work. It's not necessarily something that you can just quickly throw in, edit, send out quick. If you've never worked in it before, I definitely encourage people play with it. The cameras have it. If you can get your hands on the recorders, it's fun to shoot in RAW and have the extra control. And as Dennis is saying, you're working with a RAW file. You're not working with something that has to be processed before it gets into the recorder. So you get more flexibility and you get 12-bit color depth. So if you really need super color accurate, it's an awesome thing to work with. So let's see here. Sigurd says, I grade in Adobe Premiere because I assume that's a clown icon. Well, I work with Premiere as well because I'm primarily a Windows user and I just never got into the Resolve workflow and never had to. So definitely not a clown for working in Premiere. Yeah, I'm a big proponent of edit in what works for you. Doesn't really matter. Yeah, some tools are better than others, but ultimately whatever gets the job done and you get paid for it, right? Combat says, can the S1H export true 24p to an external recorder? Not sure if the compatible external recorders are only NTSC or PAL. That's a good question. I think the Atomos Ninja 5 can do true 24 frame out. I know that if you're shooting in RAW over HDMI, no, you can't do 24 frame in 24 hertz because that's not a standard with that over HDMI. I would have to double check. I don't have my setup here right now to be able to actually plug in and check with the Ninja 5. But that is something that we can take a look at and follow up with later. Mark asks, is there an APS-C crop mode in photo on the S1R? Technically, yes, but you have to put an APS-C lens on the camera. There isn't one that you can just select and run it in APS-C mode. Ultimately, the camera shoots in full frame, and then you can crop later. The RAW files would do the same thing, even if you set it in a crop mode. It's going to record the full frame. Except if you put an APS-C lens on it, then it's going to lock it into APS-C. So, let's see. It looks like we got some pretty good on the questions there. Yeah, all right. So we're going to end the poll, actually. So if you haven't got your answer in on the poll that we dropped in there as to which S-Series camera do you have or are most interested in, we'll let that run for another minute while I wrap up the stream today. Dennis says raw video data also isn't an HDMI standard, correct? Yeah, so raw data over HDMI is also not the HDMI standard. Raw video data, or raw data over the HDMI cable is above and beyond the standard. It's outside of what it is, so the cameras comply totally to the HDMI specification, and then it's just using the unused other pipelines there. But my understanding is that it still has to conform to the frame rates that are sent over HDMI. So if it's not part of the standard there, that's why you don't typically see it. And that's one of the reasons I understand why you don't have true 24 frame over HDMI. I could be slightly wrong with that, but that is my understanding, that, yeah, there's no true 24 frame per second over HDMI. Alt Photo says, recently sold my A7S III and I hated everything about that camera. And I picked up the S1H. What an underrated camera. Well, welcome to the Lumix family. If this is the first time you're joining us for these streams, we do them every single Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern, and we love having conversations with everybody. It looks like you are new here to this particular stream, so yeah, we don't have any new updated information on the 35 or 24 1.8 S yet. As soon as we do, though, you will find out. All right. With that, I'm going to be wrapping up today. I want to thank all of you for joining in with all these awesome questions. Hopefully I got to as many of them as I really could here, but these conversations don't just stop at the end of this stream. If you have additional questions or you want to interact with us more, reach out to us on all the different social platforms. If you have questions that didn't get answered here or you have ideas for topics that you want to see in the future, we do have the entire email address set up that you can send us comments. It's lumixlive@us.panasonic.com, and it'll actually be on the end screen once we close the stream out, so you'll be able to see it there. Feel free to email us ideas, questions, future topics that you want to see us covering. We use all of the information that you guys put into the chat here to help create new streams and new topics and cover everything that people want to learn. It seems that everyone seems to like these particular types of more technical, just conversational hangout streams. So we normally have been doing, at least one AMA session each month. This is kind of a shift on that. We're still working out the final details for next week's stream, so I don't exactly have the topic ready to drop into the chat for everybody yet, but that will be posted up in the next day, so you'll be able to see what's coming next week. And then what else do we got go? RJ, sorry, I just saw another question. RJ says, what was the name of the Netflix movie shot with the S1H? It was Bo Burnham's Inside. Is the one that I was talking about with Netflix shot on the S1H. So yeah, there is a Netflix production published that was shot on S1H. I will warn people, it is a comedy special. If you are if you're not familiar with Bo Burnham's comedy, maybe take a look at it first. But it's visually, I think it was an awesome project, an awesome production. I love his special, so I thought it was really, really cool. There are also some other things out there, not Netflix, not kind of mainline productions, but people that follow different YouTubers out there. There are other YouTubers out there that have been using the S1H in some kind of more outside of the box for their normal streaming stuff, and hopefully I can bring you guys some more information about that over the next couple of days. But yeah, there's a lot of really cool stuff out there. Take a look in the different Facebook groups. If you want to know more information about Panasonic in general and Lumix products in general, make sure to subscribe to this channel. Make sure to give us a like on this video if you enjoyed this conversation. Make sure to share this out to people that you may think would be interested in these kinds of conversations. If you ever want to go back and take a look at any of the previous streams that we've done, you can take a look at the playlist on the Lumix Cameras YouTube channel that you're on now. We've got every single one of the streams that we've done for the last year and a half coming up, about a year and a half. They're all archived there, so you're able to go back and take a look at different things from the product announcements that we've done to the conversations with different industry members. We've got plenty of conversations up there with Matt Frazier, one of my counterparts here at Lumix USA. And yeah, it's just a really cool, fun community. So once again, thank you everybody for taking your time this week, joining us and jumping in on this conversation. It was awesome. Outside of that, I will see everybody on Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern Time next week for our next Lumix Live. And hope everyone has a good rest of your week and weekend. Take care, everybody.